Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. It's Way T Lightheart from Bioptimizers with another edition of the Awesome Health Podcast. And today we are going to talk about fat, all the different types of fat that is in your body, and some of the latest cutting edge research. There's some really surprising things about fat, and it relates to what diet you might select, what's right for you. And today's guest is Dr. Sylvia Tara, who has written an incredible amount of research on fat science and lifestyle after she finally got fed up with eating less and exercising more than her slimmer friends throughout her life. We all know that sucks. Her experiences told her that there was more to weight loss than just calories in, calories out. As a biochemist, she was driven to get to the bottom of fat's mysteries and the reason it vexes us. In her book, The Secret Life of Fat, she reveals the complex biology of fat, how it resists loss, and what to do to remove stubborn fat. Dr. Tara holds a Ph.D. in biochemistry from the University of California at San Diego and an MBA from the Wharton School of the University of Pennsylvania. She was a consultant with McKinsey & Company and has worked at the world's largest biotechnology companies. Dr. Tara has been featured in the Wall Street Journal, New York Times, New Yorker, the Daily Mirror, Women's Health, Wired, Scientific American, The Lancet. And she has been interviewed on various stations and was recently featured in a Nova documentary, The Truth About Fat. Welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks. It's great to be here. What an introduction. Thank you.
Well, you've got an extraordinary resume. Very interesting biochemistry with a master's degree at Wharton. Those don't necessarily is something that you would think on the list. So you have both a business mind and a chemistry mind. Before we get into the fat stuff, a little bit about your background. How did you end up in both biochemistry and MBAs? Because that's probably one of the least likely education combos that we've had on the podcast.
I like to think big, right? So, when you're getting your PhD and doing research, you're looking at a protein. Every tiny atom of that protein, you know what it is, and you're into the intricacies of details and how that protein's interacting with your body. But there's another part of me that likes to think big. What does this mean for people, right? So what does that protein mean for the mass public? What does it mean from a business sense, an economic sense, from a health sense? And so putting those two together, the biochemistry and the business, helps me think big, helps me navigate big in a big way.
It's very unique because a lot of people, I think, people in the business world often poo-poo the intellectual world, and a lot of people in the intellectual world poo-poo the business world, but yet they work symbiotically together because great discoveries need marketing to get them out to the public, because there's so many genius discoveries that happen in various scientific fields that nobody has ever heard of. In fact, Eric Weinstein on his podcast was lamenting about this fact, about how many great discoveries have been in there and have been buried primarily because of this conflict between intellectuals and the business community. And of course, today you've been gracious enough to help us share some of the things about fat that people don't know. Now, people are going to say, well, I've read all about fats. I read this book and that fat, but we're talking something different. You're talking about the body fat in your body.
Yes.
What got you into the different, this might be shocking to people. There's different types of body fat in the body.
Yep. And some of it you really need. You really need to stay alive. You need to function, and you need it to be healthy. So that's really an eye opener. And, when I started this research, the reason I started is because I myself have a lot of trouble losing fat. I have a body that loves to put fat on, loves to pack on pounds, and only releases it with great difficulty. So if you put me on the same diet as someone else who's about my size, that other person, I almost guarantee you, will lose weight faster than me, right? There's something about me that's very resistant. I got so tired of this. I got so tired of this experience. I thought, something's amiss here. There's something we don't understand about fat and bodies, and I'm going to research this. And so I did. Driven by my own personal experience, for 5 years, I pulled every piece of scientific literature out of the databases. I read everything. I talked to a whole bunch of researchers about their fat and what they were finding out. And what I was finding out was surprising. And so one thing I found out was, yes, there's different types of body fat in your body. Some of it is actually burning calories. It's not primarily storing calories. And also that fat is not just fat, right? Fat is an endocrine organ. It is releasing hormones to our body that our body desperately needs and can't get from any other source. Therefore, your body wants to protect its fat. So when you try to lose it, you're in for a fight with your own body who's trying to keep it on. And different people, we're all very individual. Different people have varying, abilities to lose fat. For some bodies, they hold on much tighter. Some bodies let it go faster. So you have to understand your body when you go on a diet. And for me, it helped me because I'm not frustrated now. I watch people lose weight faster than me all the time, but I get it. I get why, and it helps me be patient and just helps me stay on a program.
Well, I think you probably covered a lot of this, and I think people are going to jump in and get your book, The Secret Life of Fat, because one of the things I've noticed, and you touched on something already right off the bat, and that's as hormones and fat. So I have seen, my background was in the bodybuilding industry and fitness industry and things like that when I got started, and people get into what I would call dysfunctional levels of body fat. And to give people some context, when I was competing for the Mr. Universe contest in 2003, I had to wear extra soles on the bottom of my feet because the fat pads on my feet were depleted. I was so lean and ripped. And for a lot of young women who get caught in the cosmetic fitness industry, they're doing fitness competitions, they're trying to be on the cover model of Instagram, things like that. Oftentimes they're doing irreparable damage to their endocrine and hormone systems because they're doing this when they're in their early 20s, when they're supposed to have higher body fat levels. Can you talk a little bit about the relationship between body fat and hormones? Because I think a lot of people just see fat as this horrible, ugly thing that we need to get rid of and don't understand this innate relationship with fat in our bodies.
Oh, fat talks in your body. It has a voice. This is very strange, but it has a voice, and there's different tissues in your body that have ears to hear this voice. So fat is sending signals, right? That's what I mean by a voice. It's sending signals to different tissues and different organs in your body. Those organs receive that signal and they behave differently once they get that signal from fat. So one of those organs is bones, right? Bones are actually, they thicken and get higher density when you have more body fat. Part of it is the weight-bearing effect, of fat, but part of it is also the signaling. There's signaling between bone and fat that helps them build each other. This is very interesting.
Wow.
Yeah, brain size is linked to fat, right? People who have anorexia nervosa or they're very lean body fat, they'll actually reduce brain volume, right? And sometimes have cognitive issues. So, fat through its hormones, it releases estrogen, right? And that's what you're getting at when you're talking about, women, when they lose too much fat, they lose some estrogen. They can't reproduce. And I talked to some sports medicine doctors, reproductive medicine doctors, and they see women with this issues. They're either athletes or ballerinas or they're an eating disorder. And they have to get them back to a nice, healthy, normal fat level for them to reproduce adequately, and lactate. All of that depends on your body fat. But no, what I found out is fat through its hormones like leptin, adiponectin, estrogen. It's affecting so much in your body. It's affecting your brain size, your bones. It's affecting your ability to heal. Wound healing, right, is linked to fat. So is your immune system, your thyroid productivity, and your reproducibility, your ability to reproduce as well. So just vast effect. Think of it like you're like a gland, right? Like if you have thyroid hormone, right? Like your thyroid gland releases thyroid hormone. You obviously need thyroid hormone to maintain your body temperature and a whole bunch of things. If you try to lose your thyroid hormone, your body will give you a fight because it doesn't want to lose that. It's the same for fat. Because it's releasing these hormones your body needs, it's actually going to protect it when you try to lose it. So think of it as that important of an organ.
I was trying to think of one surprising thing that you could think about a fat, but you've already given us some of there. What is some surprising things that people don't know about fats beyond what you've just said? I've never actually heard. I've been in this industry for over 30 years. I've never heard of the relationship between fat and bones. The cognitive stuff I knew because I've experienced it. When you are staying at a very extremely low body fat level, the impairment on cognitive function is very, very real. It's legit. Also, I've seen a cascade. Most often your hormone levels really go haywire. As a guy, it was very hard to maintain higher levels of testosterone when my fat levels got really, really low. There's a point where body fat, when it goes up, it starts to diminish, and then there's kind of like a sweet spot, and then if you go below that, then your testosterone drops. What are some other things that we don't know about this organ of fat?
It controls your brain. It controls your mind. So fat releases a hormone called leptin, right? And leptin circulates in your blood. It goes to your hypothalamus, and it actually can control your thinking. So when people start losing fat, they start getting lower levels of leptin in circulation. And your brain detects this, and it goes into overdrive because it thinks, oh my goodness, we're losing fat. There's not enough nutrition in the environment. We have to do something. Your appetite is sent into absolute overdrive of looking for food. So one thing I learned is, a lot of dieters or coaches or dieting programs will say, okay, you'll never feel hungry on this diet, not ever, right? And if you feel hungry, you're doing something wrong on my diet. What I learned is that's not really true, because as you start to lose fat, right, your brain is detecting this, and it's going to make you have a bigger appetite. You're more driven to find food. And they do experiments with this. And even people who lose fat through liposuction, right, it's not even diet. They are more prone to want to put more on their plate. They're more food seeking. They'll look at food. And when they do fMRI images of people's brains, their excitatory centers actually light up really bright when they see food compared to people who've not lost weight.
Wow.
And so it's almost like fat is controlling itself. Like it sees itself shrinking. It's like, no way, right? It goes to your brain saying, do something, help me here. And your brain will drive you to go and seek food. So that's one reason that you're hungrier as you start losing weight. So you're not doing anything wrong necessarily. This is your body's response to lowering fat. The other way that fat protects itself is that it actually can lower your metabolism by 22%, right? It shifts to a number of things. It affects your thyroid hormone, right? Slows down your metabolism. It actually gets your muscles to switch, right, to a more efficient way of burning calories. And so people who've lost, say 10% of their weight, they're at about 22% fewer calories that they need compared to someone who has not lost weight. So picture it like this. If there's someone who's 170 and lost 20 pounds to get to 150, when you compare that person to the person who's 150 naturally, the person who lost 20 pounds has to eat 22% fewer calories than the person who's at 150 naturally. There's a caloric penalty for losing some fat. And that can last for years. I think it's been studied up to 6 years. For some people, it doesn't really go away. So you got to be on your diet for a long time if you're one of those people. So I always tell people, pick a diet you really like, because it's not going to be like, yeah, I'm on this for 3 months and I'm going back to normal. You might be on this for a very long time.
I think that you illustrate something. And can you talk about how maybe you said that fat communicates with your body? How does it communicate? How does it tell that story, if you will, or tells your body what to do, or downright, like, what is the mechanism? You can go ahead and get a little geeky if you want to, because some of our more scientifically driven listeners will be interested in that.
Yeah, and there's receptors, right? So your hypothalamus is going to have receptors for leptin. So when leptin comes out of fat, goes into your blood, it roams around, goes into your brain, it's got, your hypothalamus will have the receptor, hears it. So now that it's bonded and made that contact, there's a whole signaling cascade in the cell that leads to a number of things. And one of the changes is behavior. You get more food seeking, right? Same for your skeletal muscles, right? They sense leptin. Even for your T cells, right? They have receptors as well for leptin. So there's leptin receptors, right? The ears, if you will, on a number of cells in your body. So when your fat releases leptin and they bind to the receptors, it induces a signal cascade that causes a different kind of behavior, right? So there's ears, right? The ear is the receptor on the tissue, and the voice is the signal, right? Leptin traveling throughout your body. And when it declines then, right, those receptors like, hey, I'm used to being stimulated, I'm not hearing anything, right? And then they start to internalize, and that also creates an effect on your body if they're not getting this leptin anymore. So again, your skeletal muscles, your thyroid hormone, right, even your T cells, your brain, all of it will react to that. It does not mean you can't lose weight. It does not mean it's dangerous to lose weight. You can. Just know that these are some of the reactions your body is going to go through. It's going to drive you to look for food. It's going to try to lower your metabolism. Stay with it. Don't let that throw you off. You're not failing on your diet. Your body is responding to having less fat and not liking the idea of having less fat necessarily. And these effects will happen whether you lose weight through low carb diet, through fasting, through high carb diet, or even through liposuction. If you just have your fat removed, all of this will happen. So that was a big aha moment for me to learn that, for one, fat was that tricky, right? And that complicated. And also to learn that no matter how you lose your fat, you get some of these effects.
I think you make a good point. So many people say, yeah, you don't feel hungry on your diet or things like that. And that might be true early on, but at a certain point,
yeah.
I remember my coach said, you need to redevelop your relationship with hunger if you want to be at a success at the high levels of the bodybuilding sport or fitness sport. The other thing was I had a psychiatrist by the name of Dr. David Hawkins that talked about when someone's feeling the sensation of hunger, not to call it hunger, to redefine that, to kind of start redefining how you called that, because this general aptitude of the body to want to eat more when you start losing. And I've certainly experienced that. And it's probably one of the biggest challenges, especially as we get older, is like, now I'm kind of like, do I really want to go for the hunger? No, I'll just go eat for the, you know what I mean? It's very easy to check out of that. What, you call fat an organ. And can you kind of share, like most people say, hey, the largest organ in your body is your skin. But how do you say fat as an organ?
It's an organ in a large way, the same way that skin is, right? So if you take a piece, a 1/8 square of skin, it's just a piece of skin tissue, right? No big deal. Mm-hmm. But skin in its totality all around your body is acting like an organ. Same for your fat, right? If you just take a chunk of fat out, so what? It's a big blob of fat, not a big deal. But in its totality, it is acting like an organ. Like I said, it's releasing those hormones, estrogen, right? Leptin, adiponectin is another one we can talk about. Those hormones are having vast effects all over your body, right? So fat is interacting, it's communicating, right, with other tissues in your body to keep a homeostasis for us. So it's really important. And the reason this is only coming out recently is because fat research has only been funded recently. It's only since the obesity epidemic that the NIH and other funding bodies have said, we got to put some money into this and understand what's going on with fat. So really, like I probably started in the 1980s or so is when fat research started to take off. So our knowledge about fat is fairly new. And I'm so curious to see what else we're going to find out about fat, because it turns out there's more than one kind. It's very clever, right? It's interactive within our bodies. It's not just sitting there like an inert storage bin, right? It's metabolically active. It's interacting with us. And in a way, it's trying to help us. So even when you're getting fatter, your fat's trying to help you. You have all these extra nutrients floating around, right? And if you don't have fat, where do they go? They lodge in your heart. They lodge in your liver. They go to places where they shouldn't be. And there are people who have defective fat, right? So people with lipodystrophy who can't create fat. And where do extra nutrients go? In bubbles under their skin, in blisters, right? In their liver, in their heart. So your fat is keeping you healthy. And we really have an obligation, I think, to understand our fat, help us, if you will, right? So yes, some people will have more fat. You can actually have a little extra fat as long as it's stored in healthy areas, right? It's like the subcutaneous layer. And you could still, go on. So it's best not to be very overweight, but if you have a little extra fat, it's not the end of the world either.
You talked about fat, and can you... you've kind of sort of referenced a few different types of fat. What are some of the fats? Like, can you maybe give us a list of the different types of fats and what those fats particularly do?
Yeah. So I think the one that probably your listeners know about is visceral fat versus subcutaneous fat. So the subcutaneous fat is that fat right underneath your skin layer, right? And it's white fat. It's the kind of fat we want to lose when we get too much fat, for sure. And that's the endocrine organ also. There's also visceral fat, right? That fat underneath your stomach wall that's really packed in tight against your internal organs. that's the really dangerous fat that, gets really inflamed when we get too much of it. And once it's inflamed, it's sending out cytokines and all kinds of inflammatory signals to your body. It's the kind that leads to diabetes and heart disease, right? And all kinds of things. That's your visceral fat. There's also brown fat, right? And that is fat it's brown from a high density of mitochondria. It burns calories to keep you warm, right? And so this is interesting. They've tried injecting brown fat into white fat to see if, it helps lose weight. And in animals, it does. And then there's also a fourth fat that's more newly discovered, that's beige fat. And that's fat that is capable of turning brown when you exercise, right? So, as it turns out, like fat loss begets fat loss. So like when you exercise, not only are you burning calories, but you're also building bone mass and you're building muscle mass. You're building tissues that burn more calories. You're also turning some beige fat brown, right? And that brown fat's going to burn more calories too, right? So then you get like kind of weight loss, begets weight loss through a number of different avenues. And the opposite, if you're sitting there sedentary, you're not building good tissues and you're not converting your beige fat to brown. It's easier to gain the more you gain, right?
It's very much like how your muscle fiber types can change from the super fast twitch to then kind of fast twitch. But if you continue on, you can kind of flip over you develop more mitochondria and, you get into the endurance type. So it would stand to reason that fat cells also have this kind of amorphism kind of thing. It's really, really cool. I love this. This is I can't wait to get deeper into the book. I think the question that everybody's sitting here going is like, okay, I'm one of those people that just can't lose fat. Like, my family's big boned, or we're all like my family, they say, oh, they're big boned, or those people, they're plump family, or they're all sorts of kind of colloquial descriptions depending on what part of the world that you're from. And you'll even see this with high-level athletes. You'll see some high-level athletes, great examples, the UFC. You'll see these guys that look completely out of shape, but can have no problem going 5 rounds of like combat fighting, or endurance swimmers and things like that. What's going on there?
There is genetics associated with fats, right? So, I write about this. And because I've had such a hard time with fat, I looked at all avenues of how people gain weight. So I didn't just look at fat itself and what the heck is it doing, right? But all the different ways we gain fats that a lot of people don't think about. Obviously, there's gluttony. That's your biggest, easiest way to gain.
That's mine. Gluttony. I'm the gluttony guy, folks. The sporting event comes on and the chips go down my face.
There are people who can eat like that and don't really have a problem.
I know.
Yeah, and in fact, they're skinny. They have trouble gaining. It's really individual. But there are genetic types, right? That you can be one of those skinny types that can eat a lot, or you can be this type that barely eats, sufficiently, and you can be heavy. And I write about this, and there's different examples of it. I mean, one is the Pima Indians that have been researched, right? So they're
incredible.
Yeah. So the ones in Arizona that started eating like the foods of Caucasians when the Caucasians settled nearby. They used to farm, they used to hunt, they used to be active and eat kind of whole foods. And then as more processed foods came into their environment, they became obese. And yet some of the Caucasians who were eating the same foods around them did not become obese. They were normal looking. And so, of course, the question is, well, what went on here? And the theory is that, this line of Indians had experienced famine in their history. They were nomadic. They lived in deserts. Famine would come around every 10 years. Their bodies evolved in a way that they had a very thrifty genotype. So whatever was coming into their system, the body was very eager to not waste a thing, right? To put everything into fat. So when this easy processed food came around, their bodies put it into fat. They didn't waste it. And that's interesting. And there's also specific genes that have been identified and studied now, right? One is IRS1, versions A and B. There's FTO that affects appetite. There's twin studies that are really interesting too. Twins will sometimes gain at the same amount and in the same locations, right? Compared to other people, even though they put them on the same regimen as they do for other twin sets. So there's a genetic component to things. There's also just like a microbiome component, right? We have bacteria in our bodies. Depending on your distribution, you could be getting more calories out of your food compared to less. Age is another factor. We lose our fat burning hormones with age. Having said all of this, it doesn't mean you can't lose weight. I just want to make that clear. I think it does get harder, especially as you age. If you're from a disadvantaged genotype, say, right, one that's very thrifty, that wants to store everything. Gender, females, right, gain weight by far easier. And I have a whole chapter about men versus women in my book as well. Older, it's harder too. You just have to be more on it. You just have to be more diligent, and you have to wait a lot longer for that fat to leave you. So like for any coaches, if you have a 22-year-old male versus a 55-year-old female, right, who's like 50 pounds overweight, has had a couple of kids, that woman's going to lose at a much slower rate on the same diet as that 22-year-old male. And I've worked with coaches at times who they were sure I was cheating on something, on a diet.
Mm-hmm.
No, I'm not. It just takes me, honestly, about 2 weeks to lose a pound. And that's just the way my body is. It doesn't mean I give up. I just have to wait longer for the result to come in.
One of the areas I think that's fascinating, you just touched on it for a second, is the relationship between your microbiome and fat. And so there's been research where they've used different types of probiotics. They've inserted them into people and they gained body fat. And then there's some, they put other probiotics, bacteria cultures inside a person and they lost body fat. What is this relationship between the microbiome and fat?
Yeah, this is a really interesting one. It's also in our control, I'll say. So we have a distribution of bacteria in our gut. And depending on what that distribution is, what type of bacteria you have in your gut, there are some that really can extract a lot of calories out of our food. They can break down polysaccharides. They can make them very digestible. They can produce sugars. They actually will help you gain fat, right? Gain weight and absorb all those calories. There's other kind of bacteria that, they'll let a lot more pass. They won't absorb it all. A lot more will go in as waste. And, what they find is that people who have a high diversity of fruits and vegetables in their diet, their microbiome tilts towards one that lets a lot more go out as waste, right? It doesn't try to fight with the food to digest all that really hard fiber stuff. More will go out as waste. So again, fat loss begets fat loss, because if you eat more fruits and vegetables, right, raw fruits and vegetables in particular, you're getting less calories and you're feeling full because you're getting a lot of fiber. At the same time, you're getting your microbiome to turn into one that's tilted towards one that absorbs less calories from your food. So fat loss is begetting fat loss. On the other hand, people who have a lot of processed food like flour and sugar, their microbiome tends to tilt towards one that's very efficient at getting all the calories out and producing more sugars as well. And so weight gain, right? You're eating those kind of foods to begin with, which isn't great. They help you gain weight. And then you're tilting your microbiome to one that's highly efficient at pulling calories out, right? And so then fat gain begets fat gain. So it's almost like that bowl of Cheerios. It says 100 calories, per bowl. For some people, it's 80 calories, depending on your microbiome. For other people, it's 120 calories, right? There's a variation there.
This is the big factor. I think a lot of people in my coaching that you would have to kind of gauge where that person is and then see their diet and then regulate up and down. And there's very big variances between people's metabolic rates on the same diet.
Yeah.
And that's because you're saying that's because of the bacteria and how it efficiently processes those particular types of calories, right? Would that be accurate?
That's one factor. The other factor is going to be genetics, right? The other factor is going to be gender and age. You got to think of all four of those things.
Let's talk about that for a second. Talk about genetics. I was just, funny enough, I was just on the phone yesterday with my genetics and epigenetic expert, because I do these kind of full bore health profiles every year. I go through heavy metals, I go through genetics, we go through hormones, we do blood glucose monitoring, we do all these kind of cool, fun things in the biohacking community. And we were going through the specific types of genetics related to certain risk factors and how to offset it with food and elements that I needed to be mindful of. For example, different vitamins I have to be conscious of because I don't process some vitamins as well. Toxicity. I'm not as good at detoxing some toxins and some I'm really good at. Talk about the role of genetics and fat and how do you tweak that, or what's some common things that you might know?
Yeah. I mean, so we talked about the genotypes, right? Like the Pima Indians, and there's other races also. If you come from a history of like fasting or famine, you very well could have one of these really thrifty genotypes that help you absorb more calories. But then there's a couple others that have been identified and studied now. I mean, one is the IRS1 gene. Depending on which variant you have, people who have I think it's the B variant, they store more fats, right? So they clean their blood. In a way, they're healthier. They don't have a lot of floating triglycerides around because their body's very efficient at taking them out of the blood and putting into fat. So they tend to be a little fatter, but healthier. And then there's the FTO gene, right? That a certain variation of the FTO gene causes a higher appetite in people, right? They have this variant and you put them in a buffet, they tend to load up their plate with more energy dense foods like cookies and chips and things like that. So, and again, fat research is kind of new. So there's new learnings coming out all the time, new genes being discovered, new variants of genes being discovered that'll tell you, how your body's going to interact with food and how it might store. One thing that helps, though, even with genetics and just coming from the twin studies and all the other studies, exercise seems to mitigate the effects of genes, right? So people with FTO, IRS1, if they even do moderate exercise, like biking for half an hour or some vigorous gardening or something like that, the effect of the gene seems to attenuate, right? So that's one way to keep that down. So you can still, like I said, even though life might be harder for you, depending on the hand you've been dealt, right? If it's genes or gender, age, or whatever it might be, there are still ways you can lose weight. And that's what the book is all about, really, is that, if you're like me, and the reason I started writing is because I have that problem. I have very stubborn fat, right? My body that loves to gain and doesn't want to give it up. And so I looked at all angles, what could be causing that? And it kind of knocks out any reason you might have had to not believe you could lose weight, because you can. Again, it's slower, and you have to be more persistent, and you have to work a little bit more. You might have to exercise a little bit more, be incredibly careful about what it is you're eating in order for that weight to go. But fear not, you can lose weight even if you've got a stubborn fat body.
We'll keep going. The book, for the listeners who just might have joined us, is The Secret Life of Fat. We're getting into it. I'm going to ask the big question here, of course, that we get all the time. That is, why do women seem to gain more fat than men?
Yeah, that's a whole chapter. And of course, I had to look that up because I'm married to a skinny guy who eats whatever he wants and always has, and has never had to change the size of his jeans ever. He has his college size jeans on still.
Amazing.
But it's unfair and it's frustrating. Girl babies gain more fat right after birth. I mean, it's noticeable at birth. They've studied like 5,000 babies, right? And they do body fat measures. And even at birth, girls have more fat than boys. And probably even before birth, they have more fat than boys. So women partition nutrients differently, right? So like when we eat, there's some amount of nutrients that just get partitioned into various tissues. It's almost like a 401k, right? Like your paycheck, if you do a 401k, some certain amount you're putting into savings, no matter what happens, right? There's some certain amount that's going into this 401k. And bodies do the same thing a little bit. They partition nutrients, and women tend to partition more nutrients into fat than men. In fact, they store fat at 2 to 3 times the rate that men do. It keeps them healthier, to be honest. So they'll be chubbier, but healthier. So again, that fat's not floating around their blood. It's not lodging in their liver. It's going into fat tissue where it belongs, right? And it happens fairly quickly. So that's one reason. Another reason is that, women's bodies depend on estrogen. They depend on fat for estrogen, I should say, after menopause, right? So once your ovaries stop producing so much estrogen, your fat produces it. That's one theory about why middle-aged women in particular seem to have a hard time losing fat. Again, your body is dependent on it and protective of it. And then women's bodies respond differently, right, to fat. So they interact differently with fat. So when we exercise, say when we're fasting overnight, or we're exercising hard and we're depleting our energy source, women's bodies will reach for fat more, right? They'll burn fat. when you're done exercising and you eat something, they'll store fat back at a rate of 2 to 3 times as fast as men will. Whereas men's bodies will reach for glycogen more than fat, right? So men don't have such an open door relationship with their fat. Things don't go in as much and they don't come out as much. So women's bodies are quite different. And when women do exercise a lot as well, they release more ghrelin from their stomach. So ghrelin is a hormone in your stomach that causes hunger. And women, after a tough bout of exercise, will release about 33% more ghrelin than men.
Wow.
Yeah. And so if you let them go to a buffet, let them eat afterward, they, of course, have a higher tendency to overcompensate because they're really, really hungry. And so, as a woman, you just have to know you will have a higher fat level. It's actually normal and natural for you to do that. And women's health is dependent on fat, especially in the teenage years, right? That bone growth is dependent on a healthy fat level. Brain size, brain volume is dependent, your ability to reproduce, right, is dependent on a healthy fat level. Nature has made fat more important in women compared to men, right? And even when you look at the fasting things like the Ansel Keys research, right? I mean, men have to go to a much, much lower fat level in order to have ill health effects compared to women. They'll start having it faster, right? On that effect. So anyway, I thought that was very interesting. Our bodies, nature has designed it that we just store more fat. We gain it easier. We don't let it go as much. And when there's a signal that fat might be going, like exercise, there's these signals that come out of our bodies that say, please eat something more right now. So it's just design.
As a fat researcher, I think, and I mean, I've been in the health and wellness industry my whole life, a little over 30 years professionally. What are some of the myths around weight loss? Because you hear so much conflicting information, and a lot of it is, I would say, not nuanced. In other words, like you said, a dietary practice for a 22-year-old male is very much different than maybe a post-menopause female in her mid-50s. What are some of those myths that you blow up in this book?
The Bioptimizer mission is to help more of the world fix their digestion at a core level. The truth is, your digestion is only as good as your enzyme levels. Imagine trying to build a house with a tree. It's impossible. You need to chop the tree down into small pieces. Similarly, in order for your food to be used by your body, it must be broken down into a bioavailable form. And that's what enzymes do, converting protein into amino acids, fats into specific fatty acids, and carbohydrates into usable energy units. We start out with an abundance of enzymes, and that's why kids can digest just about anything really quickly. The thing is cooking food kills enzymes, as they cannot survive at temperatures above 118 degrees. So years of this ends up depleting our bodies and leads to weak digestion. Taking digestive enzymes like masszymes, which has an incredibly high level of protease for digesting protein, as well as other critical enzymes like lipase, amylase, and others, is a total game changer. Suddenly, you strengthen your digestion, eliminate gas and bloating, boost metabolism, and multiply your energy. Most importantly, you fix your digestion at a core level. To get started with Masszymes and to save 10% on your first order, go to masszymes.com. That's MASSZYMES.com and use the code MASS10, MASS10.
And the biggest one is that one diet can fit all, right? Well, so when you get into the dieting industry, the way you sell a lot of books or a lot of programs is that, you put it out there and you say, this is going to cure all your ills, right? If you do this diet, you won't be hungry. You'll lose 20 pounds in 20 days. You'll feel great. And, if you're not having all these effects, you're doing something wrong. You're not following the diet the right way. And it is so incorrect based on all my research, right? When you start to look at really how individual people are, right? And there's research that show they study, blood sugar levels after people eat. Some people can eat a muffin, nothing happens. There's no change in their blood sugar at all. Other people have a bite of a muffin and their blood sugar is going right through the roof. We're very individual in how we respond to food, how our bodies respond, and how much fat we store. We have different propensities for storing fat. So one diet's not going to work for everybody, right? And I actually just put out a course now to go along with the book that's a little bit more kind of how to implement some of all these findings, because I know that's the hardest part. But if you have stubborn fat like I do, you have to ratchet up. And so I've been on diets where I've actually gained weight. Like for a while, there was a dieting fad that you're supposed to graze all day. You exercise a lot and graze all day. I think they do this in The Biggest Loser as well. I gained weight on those things. And of course, the coach thinks I'm doing it wrong and, I must be cheating all the time. How else could this possibly happen? And none of those things were true. Because I have really stubborn body fat, what I've opted for, what I've noticed works really is intermittent fasting, right? That's one of the most surefire ways. And when you extend that overnight fast, right, there's so hormonally, right, you start to make use of your hormones to help you bust through your fat. So growth hormone, which peaks at night, is a great fat buster. We have lower levels as we age. And if you eat like close to bedtime, you actually mitigate the levels of growth hormone and they're not as effective. So if you can stay hungry before you go to bed, a little bit after bed, you have more of it in circulation, you bust through that fat. Making use of testosterone, right? There's certain like exercises. If you can do, squats, things that are kind of weightlifting, right? Some aerobic, you'll get a little bit more testosterone too. So try to you have to be a little bit more clever. If you're, a bit older with very stubborn fat, you have to pull a couple levers that people who are younger didn't yo-yo diet as much, right? Don't have to do. And so that's what the book is about. And the course more so about just how to adjust, how to make a diet, right, work for you. If you're not losing weight on it, what are the things you can do to up the ante, such as intermittent fasting, right, to get it to finally start losing some pounds.
What are some of the things that you have found that helps people select the right diet for them? And I have a topic, it's actually coming out in our next book, which I call the bell curve, the BS of the bell curve. And what happens is every time you jump on a dietary site, you'll see all of what I would call the people at the far extreme level of the bell curve, which this was the diet that helped them overcome some serious medical condition and they lost body fat and their IQ jumped 10 points and they're doing cartwheels. And then conversely, if you go to the comment section on their social media, you see these people, I got sick, I developed this and other, and I would say they're on the other end of the bell curve. And then you have this this distribution of people in the middle, but we always see the extremes. And then the people in the low end end up going to another diet and said, I tried that diet, and this diet fixes, and you see this cycle helping it goes on these cycles every 4 or 5 years, the rise and fall of dietary fads. How do you avoid going on the circus ride of diets and select the right one for you, the person?
Yeah, I mean, a diet has to work for you psychologically, socially, and biologically, right? So if there's a diet you don't like, right, if it's very restrictive, you have to eat certain foods, you have to buy special foods, there's a lot of prep, and you're a really busy person, you're not going to stay on that diet, right? Or if you don't like a lot of rules, right, you're not going to stay on that diet. So it has to work for you and your lifestyle, right? So my whole thing of intermittent fasting, it doesn't work for everyone because some people really want to eat dinner with their families, right? So that they're not going to do what I do, but it's okay. You got to find one that works in all three dimensions, and you have to be able to stay on it for over a year at least, right? So find something you can pick for the long run. So your lifestyle matters, your psychological preferences matter, and so does it matter if you're losing weight on the scale or not. Right. So I think that's one of the big problems. I mean, Atkins' diet is successful, right? If you eat all meat and high fat and very little carb, yeah, you'll lose weight. It has such a high recidivism rate. People can't stay on it. And they come off and they gain more than before because psychologically, that's really hard to stay on, right? And socially too. So find one that, you can manage for a really long time. The other thing is because bodies are so different and we respond and interact with food differently, keep a log of everything you're doing. This is what I've done. I've learned to do, and it's almost like self-directed dieting. But try a diet and do it for a couple weeks or 3 weeks. If you've lost nothing, I don't know that diet's working for you, right? You probably need a couple levers to up the ante. And the levers you can use, right? One is that overnight fasting window. Just start widening it. Right? Like if you're eating at 8 o'clock, all right, fine, stop eating at 6 now. Like just experiment, keep a log of everything you're doing and experiment. The other thing is, I think, processed food. So a lot of foods that are supposed to be healthy, right, that come in a package and you warm it up or whatever, and they're called healthy. I don't know what's in food anymore. Like there's so much filler, right? That there's so much like gelatins and carbs and preservatives that you don't necessarily know what you're eating. So you might think you're eating a chicken breast, but it's not. It's something else completely. And so the more you can really control what it is you eat, cook. It's not that hard to cook. Just bake a piece of chicken, microwave it if you have to, but know what's in your food, because you might feel like you're following a plan, but you're not. Who knows what you just ate, really. That's another lever. High intensity interval training, I think, is another lever. That's a very interesting one where you really shock your body right into some exercise. And I've seen that also bust through fat at times. So experiment, right? And the first things to look at are your eating window or your fasting window. Careful of the carbs that you have coming in. Really monitor meal to meal what you're eating. And then you might see some hidden carbs once you have a log. Cut those out. You might be surprised at what you're eating just unconsciously. And then, also try the exercising on hungry if you can, right? Like either when you wake up, if you can stand, it makes me hungry all day. So I don't do it in the morning. Sometimes I do it at night when I'm a little bit fasted and I just go to bed. And so I don't have to feel hungry afterward. But use those levers, right? And if you're clever about it and you can keep a log and you're diligent, you can make a diet work for you.
What are some of the kind of pieces of advice that you would suggest to someone that, maybe has been struggling for a long time with different diets and stuff, but they're like, you know what, I really want to get this right. I want to lose weight right now. I don't know what to do. What are some of the standby things that you need to put into place?
I think for one is there's two things. It's be patient and just forgive yourself, right? This is not an easy thing to do. And dieting and bodies are very complex. And just because you tried a whole bunch of diets, they didn't work, doesn't mean that one can't work. And if you go in with a positive attitude, you're going to do better at it. So there's something called dichotomous thinking. And I write about the psychology of losing fat as well, because it's really important. I mean, we need mental strength to go on a diet. When people make decisions all day or they're worn out, they have less mental strength and restraint, right? They tend to cave in. That's why a lot of people cave at dinner, because you've had a hard day, right? And so it's a muscle in a way, willpower. So the time in your life has to be right. You have to totally believe you can do this, and you have to be able to feel what it's like, which we know we're going to be hungrier because we have less leptin. We know our metabolism's down now because we have less leptin again. You're going to go through this. If you're going through a divorce, if you're going through a job change, don't start dieting right now, right? Just wait. wait till you're mentally, you have the bandwidth, right? The strength to take this on. Know it's going to take a really long time, and don't beat yourself up if someone's losing weight faster than you or you haven't lost a pound for 2 weeks. It's going to take a long time for that wall to crack. Just stay with it, right? Find a diet that works for you that you can stay on forever. And it's a lifestyle now, right? And there's nothing wrong with that. And there's something called dichotomous thinking where people like fail or they go off a diet. They feel like a failure. They feel like they've lost. There's no point in staying on. You'd be surprised at how many diets that ruins, right? And so some of the people who've tried and come off, it's because, well, they came off because they couldn't stand it, but then they came off a second day and a third day. Now they gained the weight back and now they just feel like a failure and I failed on my diet. But you didn't really. I mean, you made a conscious decision to go off and you had ice cream or whatever. So you did. If you can forgive yourself faster for that breach and get right back on, it's not a big deal. Everyone comes off their diets sometime. And in a way, because our willpower needs a little bit of a break here and there, it's not so bad to come off once in a while and indulge. The key is to get right back on and not lose your confidence with it. And so I think, what I'd say to people who've tried again and again is, I have a chapter called Mind Over Fat. Take a look at it, right? There's ways to psych yourself up to get on something and stay on it, right? Even if it's slow, and even if you've come off, like there's ways to just stay very tenacious on your diet, and that's really the key, I think, for long-term weight loss.
I like that term you bring up, slow and fast. So, what would you say is slow fat loss, and what would you say is fast fat loss? There, we say that 3 times, for both women and for men, over that's sustainable, I should say, because sometimes, we'll see people go on these like extreme starvation diets and lose a bunch of weight, and then they triggers a big gain afterwards. So what do you feel is a reasonable level to work towards?
Again, that's so individual, right? I mean, for me, I'd love to be able to lose a couple pounds a week, which feels healthy, feels like nothing bad, but I can't. It won't happen. So for me, it's like, a pound every couple of weeks. And that's if I'm lucky. There are other people that can lose a few pounds a week and they're fine. It depends on how much weight you have to lose as well. If you're 300 pounds overweight, there's no problem with losing 5 pounds a week or so, right? You should be able to do that. It's all relative and it's all on a scale. I think crash dieting, like fasting, things like that. I mean, fasting is something a lot of people do now with the bone broth diets and things like that. You're getting the nutrients you need for your brain to keep ticking and your body to keep going and you feel okay with it, it's great. But you can't overcompensate later and say, yeah, I fasted for a week and I'm going to, eat everything I can. You have to be careful on that ramp back. And that's what you have to watch.
Yes.
The body doesn't like change, right? It doesn't want to, stop eating altogether, and it doesn't want to start eating altogether. It wants to get to homeostasis where it knows what to expect from its environment. And that's when it's happy. That's why when you start losing weight, right, and you start like lowering your fat, your body's not happy because you've taken it out of its homeostatic, environment where everything was controllable and knew what to expect. And when you throw it into uncertainty like that, it tries to maintain whatever it had, whether it was more fat or less fat, right? Like after I've lost weight, I was able to I remember Christmas time, I was able to eat more at Christmas and cheat. I didn't gain weight either. My body didn't want to change on that direction either, right? It just wanted to stay the same. So I think if you can be gentle, right? If you're going to go lose weight, I wouldn't necessarily do night and day, like eating 5,000 calories one day, fasting the next. I would go into it slowly, let your body adjust with you on the diet.
Yeah, and one of my old coaches, who was one of the first guys to distinguish about metabolism and the consequences of extreme dieting and how it can, he was one of the first guys to coin metabolic damage many, many, many years ago, particularly in the fitness industry specifically. And one of the interesting experiences you talk about, and he's been very lean for a very long period of time, and he cites an event. He took a 2-week vacation to Aruba. Now he's been in what I would say an optimized metabolism for at least 30 years, at least. He went on this trip and on a mission to gain as much weight as he could. And he ate like a maniac for 2 weeks, didn't exercise, whatever, comes back and he's less weight than he was when he went. And proving this point about metabolism, it's not calories, it's not calories in, calories out. It's about kind of mastering that communication between the fat in your body, your lifestyle, and then how you're going to go about losing or eliminating the excess fat or getting into an optimized state. Is there any other things that we haven't touched on today that you feel that would be great for people to learn about fat? And maybe I want you to shamelessly plug this book because it's so cool, this topic.
Let me think. I think we talked about a lot. We talked about the microbiome. We talked about genetics. Viruses can also cause fat. You can actually catch fat. It can be contagious.
Fat is contagious?
It can be.
We're going to talk about this because we might have to do another lockdown. There's a fat virus coming around.
There are viruses that cause fat. It's been known about in animals for a long time, right? The Rouse sarcoma virus was known to cause fatness in mice. No, some of that was chickens. Actually, the canine distemper virus causes fatness in mice. And so they've known for a while that some viruses cause obesity. They can cause a high level of fatness. And they have found one for humans too. It's called 8036. And people who have been infected tend to be about 30% heavier than people who've not been infected.
Wow.
And in a way, the virus, it's an adenovirus, so it stays resident in your cells even, after infection. And it works like insulin, right? It helps your body absorb more glucose from your blood. It creates more fat molecules and then ultimately creates more fat cells. And they're actually researching it now as a way to help with diabetes because it'll internalize glucose very quickly and create more fat out of it, but it'll keep the glucose out of your blood. So it's very interesting. And so people who've had it, and they're not even sure how contagious it is, how people get it exactly, but it can cause fatness. So I write about somebody who had the virus, this man named Randy, and the book is written through stories of researchers, stories through patients. So it's not like a textbook; it's a very readable book, told through stories of people. But there's a man named Randy who had struggled with his weight for his whole life, and he finally he got obese. He landed in the hospital, and his doctor said, there's this research program over at University of Wisconsin. You should go there. They might be able to help you. And so he goes there and he meets this man, Nikhil Durandar, who's been researching 8036, for much of his career, researching viruses and fat. And they test him, and it turns out he had been positive for 8036. And they explained to him how it causes fatness, how this might be leading to his troubles. And it was like a night and day kind of awakening for this man named Randy, where he all of a sudden understood why he had so much trouble managing his fat his whole life, why he gained so easily, why these diets were constantly failing him. It's because he had a different body type, a type that really stored fat very readily, more than most bodies. And if you have that kind of body, there's things you have to do above and beyond what other people have to do. And so Randy now is like in super shape. I mean, he lost a lot of weight. He's like 6 foot something. He weighs like 135 pounds. He's very careful about what he eats. He calls the world the eating world and the non-eating world. Like there are people who can eat and nothing happens to them. And there's people like him, right, who have to be so careful. So when he's at a picnic and his family's, having pizza, he'll bring his boiled eggs and salad and he'll just stay on his diet. But so, I mean, that's what I mean, like knowledge is power. So some people found my book to be a bit depressing because it was, saying all these different ways we lose weight, how hard it can be to lose weight. But I took it to be very empowering. And like in the same way that Randy took knowledge to be very empowering, once you know, right, why diets have been failing you, why you have stubborn fat, you can now work with it. Right. And you're not fooled by siren songs of this diet's going to make you lose weight quick. Like you kind of know what you're working with and what the challenge is, and you can adjust your life to handle that challenge. And so think of it positively. Just think of it as, knowledge is power. You now know your body. You now know what to do. You have to up the ante. And yep, it's not fair compared to people who can eat all the time, but it is what it is. But you at least now know what it is you have to do.
Where can people get the book? We're going to put this in the show notes, as well as follow you, social media, all that sort of stuff.
Yeah. So you can get the book on Amazon.com. I think it's still in some Barnes and Nobles as well. It's in paperback. Hardback's much nicer. I think it's a much nicer copy than the paperback. So you can get it. I'm on Facebook at Sylvia Tara, Ph.D., on Twitter as well. And then you can email me. Go to the website. It's called www.thesecretlifeoffat.com. And that's where the course is, right? That's where my email is. And I do correspond with people, especially those ones that have had stubborn fat seem to be the ones who reach out to me. But give it a try, right? Just really take your time, read the book, go through the course slowly. There's so much material. Really, it's 5 years worth of research condensed into a couple hundred pages. It's overwhelming. But you'll start to see things that work for you, right? There'll be like kind of workout sheets, things that you can do, levers you can pull, right, to make a diet more effective for you. So give it a try. And don't get down. Don't get down about any of it. It's hard, but you can do it.
Dr. Sylvia Tara, this has been an exciting and interesting interview. I know my listeners are going to love it. I appreciate you taking the time to share your story about the secret life of fat. And I don't think this is depressing at all. I think this is really cool, really exciting. We will put the links for how you can order this in the show notes, and certainly something that you might want to share with your friends, with your family members who might have struggled, so that you can know that there is help and there are reasons for the way you are, and there's ways to get to where you want to go. You just got to know exactly what to do. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today on the Awesome Health Podcast. I'm Wade-T Lightheart from Bioptimizers. I want you to have an awesome day. Take care and learn the secrets, the secret life of fat with Dr. Sylvia Tara. Thanks so much for joining us today. Take care.
At Bioptimizers, our mission is to fix digestion. And a cornerstone of digestion is gut flora. P3OM is our patented probiotic formula. In fact, we call it the Navy SEALs of probiotics. You see, strong proteolytic or protein digesting activity is paramount to having a healthy gut flora. And of course, P3OM provides that. The good news is, unlike weaker probiotics, P3OM survives the digestion process. What it does is it basically multiplies the good guys while protecting you against pathogens, or what some people call the bad guys. P3OM really helps to rebuild your digestion. And what that allows you to do is to maximize nutrient uptake, energy, and metabolism. To find out more of how P3OM can help you, go to www.bioptimizers.com.
Thank you for listening to the Bioptimizers Awesome Health Podcast. You can find more information at bioptimizers.com.